how to watch these commercials, how to make fun of them, how to mock them. So even if you are a consumer of the skin lightening commercials, they give you some space to talk back, right, to the commercials. They're also part of what some scholars would call the creation of a global civil society, right, speaking out against corporate hegemony. And finally, they're also enacting a form of carnival, and they're crude, they exaggerate oppression, they're vulgar, but they get their point across. Let me begin by showing you what these are, sort of the stories that they are mocking, right? And you can see the first commercial, grumpy to happy, right? So you can see the progression. So literally, the affective state is changing. Here's one more, far more subtle, and a binary vision. Again, sad to happy. And then again, and then of course, your emotional state is tied to your skin color changing every day, right? So every week, they tie it to weeks. So Fair and Lovely will say, within 6 weeks, you will see results. But guess what? If you don't use me, you go back to that grumpy person, right? And so you got to keep using the product over and over again. So literally, your body becomes sort of a source of surveillance, right? So you're surveying your body day after day, monitoring these changes in skin color. And there's also a lot of television commercials. And I chose not to show you all because then it takes up all the time. So I apologize, right? So this is a very popular television commercial that had a shelf life, a long shelf life. A young woman and her father go into a beauty company. It's obvious they're from the village because they go into this modern company and say, I want to do a puja. Right? And it's sort of ludicrous because it's a modern company. They get turned away. She goes off. Her father finds all these ancient Ayurvedic herbal ingredients. They rain down from the sky. They mix it in this sacred bowl. She applies the cream, and then you see her stepping out from an airplane, right? Total sort of aesthetics of modernity. No bindi, no hair tied back, no sari. She's completely changed. And she goes back to the beauty company, and the same secretary who insults her is now sort of dumbfounded, right? So there's a moment of recognition as well. Let's just look at some of the spoofs. So this is a spoof put together by Fauzia Mirza, a Canadian-born Pakistani gay Muslim actor, activist, and filmmaker. She's got a great website. She critiques all sorts of other sort of South Asian, oppressive traditions, etc. So this is her in her spoof. The spoof reenacts exactly the television commercial I told you about. She walks in with her father. She gets rejected, and then she uses the cream, and then she turns into this very noisy, braying unicorn, right? And then you see the beauty company, you see a suited CEO with other representatives standing in front and holding a press conference while the unicorn is braying, right? And holding the product and saying, you want to be beautiful, use Fair and Lovely. So this is one example. This is another one. And you can see they took the 6 faces and they changed it into 9. Right, so you got to wait longer. You have to have pain longer. So 9X Fairness Cream commercial. This is an interesting story. You have the first woman, who's an Indian woman. She's walking through an airport again. I don't know why airports are. Airport again. Bumps into another Indian woman friend. The Indian woman friend she bumps into says, you don't look good. You need to look better. You need to use 9X Fairness Cream commercial. So our protagonist uses 9X Fairness Cream commercial, and then you see these shots, and instead of becoming lighter, she turns into a white woman, right? A completely white woman. The white woman steps out of the screen, goes back to the airport, and the immigration official tells her, you need to go to the white foreigners section, right? You have come to the wrong section. So again, sort of a ridiculous claim, right? That you can actually become white rather than light. Now, critiques of arranged marriage. The top face is a Hindustan Lever Fair and Lovely commercial that is showing you a bride, right? She's been rejected by a groom for an arranged marriage setup. And generally what happens in these arranged marriage commercials are, when the woman gets rejected, she gets very withdrawn, introspective. You see her in her bedroom or in a sort of private room, staring at herself in a mirror and looking very sad, right? Silent, passive, sad. And then lo and behold, a mother, sister, somebody brings a tube of cream and helps her out, and then you see her beaming. here, this is a Bengali reenactment. What happens here is when the groom rejects the bride, she's not melancholy, pensive. She gets hysterical and crazy, right? And starts screaming and saying, no, no, and jumping up and down. Then she goes into the bathroom. Mother follows with a big industrial-sized bottle that says bleach. Bleach, right? The young woman puts on the bleach, and then there's no transformation. She goes back to the arranged marriage ritual looking like that, right? And the groom says, you're so beautiful, I want to marry you now, right? Immediately, okay? And so this is, again, sort of a mockery of the earlier commercial. And then at the end, her friend joins her with the same bleach on her face, and they're jumping up and down and saying, fair and lovely, be fair, not ugly, right? About 6 or 7 times. So this is how the commercial ends. Now, there's an interesting set of commercials that are actually looking at the pressures on men to become lighter skinned, right? Because that's a new market in India now. And so this first one that I'm showing you here was a Malayalam parody. And in this, a young man is playing billiards with a woman, and she says, you're too dark for me, I don't want to date you, right? So off he goes home, and his mother also berates him, and then he goes into the bathroom, and it's very interesting. He's suddenly surrounded with golden light, and a disembodied voice says, almost like mythological Hindu serials, this divine intervention. A voice says, don't worry, I have a miraculous solution for you, right? And hands him a tube, and then, he gets lighter skin, and the woman accepts him. This one is by Samosa TV called Make Me White. In this, you have this is set in, seems very obviously a US location, not India, right? An ethnic grocery store in New Jersey, New York, some place where there's a huge diaspora. A woman goes into the grocery store with her boyfriend, and then, this man follows her, and interestingly, he is coded as wearing kind of blackface to look darker skin, right? Very obviously kind of darkened. And she rejects him. He finds this Make Me White cream and then becomes lighter skin. The couple, she and her boyfriend, go outside. He stalks them, and she looks at him and rejects the old boyfriend and starts running behind him. And the last scene shows the old boyfriend, very much Bollywood style, knees on the pavement going, don't leave me, right? And in this very comedic style. So this is another kind of spoof, but set in the US. Now, this one, interestingly, again was coded as a US college campus, right? And you have a group of young women, and here you have a mixing of race. So you have this African-American man who approaches them, and they reject him, and off he goes into the bathroom and begins to apply this cream, and he turns into this white man, right? And this, you see the script on the left side, fun and easy to apply, full of chemicals, go ahead, right? And he applies this cream, and he turns into this white man, and then the, girls, sort of, the young women accept him and find him desirable. Now, this one was very interesting, right? I found this on so many different websites. Okay? So this is a recreation of Obama, and if you actually look at the image closely, I couldn't get a high-quality image. He has blue eyes and brown hair and lightened, right? And so this is white Obama. And if you go further, here is a publication called The Times of Bullshit. I didn't make it up, right? That is it. The Times of Bullshit. Now, The Times of Bullshit, again centering around Obama, had an interesting invented story, right? Where they were really, really sad that Obama won because it shows now that dark-skinned people can win. What will Fair and Lovely do? They can't sell products, because their whole premise is that you can't have success in life, right, if you're dark-skinned. So they're planning to introduce a skin darkening cream, right? And so this is the whole story that they invent, that they're planning to do this. And they have a great quote about, how they're planning to capitalize on this, and while even secretly contributing, right, to the McCain campaign, right? To make sure that in case the dark didn't work out, they would still have their foot in the other door. Now, this was a more serious critique about how models in skin lightening ads, who are the first face right, and turning light skin are perpetuating forms of blackface, okay, from the minstrelsy shows and so on. The last one I want to discuss with you is from a production in Delhi called Hamara TV. And they say fair and lowly, right? Not lovely, fair and lowly. And in this one, again, you have a woman coded as unattractive. And these actually target commercials that use this rhetoric of scientific modernity, right? That these are, products that have been tested in the lab, they work, and so on. And so this woman goes to meet the doctor. The doctor says, you're looking really bad. You need help, right? And then tells you that I have a perfect sort of solution, indigenous solution for you. I have South Asian paints, and here are all the flavors you can choose. Virgin white, paneer white, Anna Hazare white, Karina white, right? And so then the family chooses, I think they choose Karina white. And then they're sitting on a couch. They're sitting on a couch, and then after using the cream, they actually become a white family, no longer Indian, right? They're a Caucasian family. And the doctor says, use this product. The white family is a happy family, right? That's how it ends. So this is kind of the universe of, the comedic spoofs. Let me get to my second section now. This is what I'm calling multicolored bodies and multiculturalist beauty. Here I'm looking at mainstream narratives, right? Like Femina and Vogue magazine, and prominent celebrities now beginning to speak out against colorism. Now, what's interesting is that they perpetuate these discourses of equality and epidermal diversity, right? That's a part of multiculturalism. But unlike the spoofs where you saw men indexed, right, sort of men being targeted, it's mostly here only for women, though. And on the one hand, I do think these mainstream discourses are inserting colorism into the public sphere and doing some critical work there. On the other hand, the way they challenge colorism is to use these kinds of, I've given you examples, right? Colors of sensuality, exotica, and intense emotion. What are the gorgeous colors of Indian skin? Dark, dusky bronze, golden, cream, coffee, right, etc. So coating it with this, commodified discourse of desirability. And this multicultural beauty nation appears to have room for all, but no one looks like the Tamilian family, right, that Politico.com gave you. They still look, they are still on the lighter end, right, of the spectrum. So let's see here. This was Femina's first, came out in 2000. And this was a story of, called Dark is Beautiful. And I won't go too much into depth of the details of the story. But basically, it was sort of targeting different representatives of the beauty industry, right? Photographers, models, beauty salon owners, all talking about how widespread this form of prejudice is and saying that, we need to recognize dark skin color for its beauty. But what was interesting was that the language that they use is very Orientalist, right? Dark skin is exotic. Others like our dark skin. We should also start liking our dark skin, right? It's appreciated in other locations and so on. And of course, like what many women's magazines do, right, where they will say, it's very, very cool to be large, but then every product, every ad is about losing weight, right? That contradiction that women's magazines perpetuate. You have the same thing there because in the same magazine, you have several ads for skin lightening products. And at the same time, you also don't see very dark skin models, right? Yet you have this sort of progressive story, right, that's been written. This was Vogue in 2010, right? They had a cover story called The Dawn of Dusk. Just a little background. Before this issue, Vogue's very first issue, some of you may recall, had a British model in the center, right? If I'm not mistaken, her name is Gemma Ward. So they had Gemma Ward in the center and two Indian models flanking her. So they were criticized for this. How can you go into India and in your first issue foreground, right, a British white woman and have Indian women, on the two sides? And so this was kind of their answer to, we can be cooler than that, right? We can be more progressive than that. And so this one, came maybe 3 issues later. Of course, celebrates the skin tone the world covets, right? So again, sort of this Orientalist tone to it. Now, this one was not so much a textual story like the Femina magazine, but it was picture after picture after picture, right, of these different kinds of models. Literally, what you saw was this sort of trope of the harem, right? Repeated again and again and again. And beneath the print story, you had these online video shoots that showed you these models actually being shot, right? And so you could relive their experience. So again, what I'm arguing here is this is also perpetuating, again, this idea of commodified multiculturalism, right? We have something, we celebrate every skin tone, except that skin tone has to come with a beautiful thin body and be young and have beautiful hair, no blemishes. So if somewhat dark skin color comes packaged, right, in perfection, that is, if you have a skin that has amnesia, that has no memory, doesn't show acne, doesn't show signs of age, then we'll celebrate your somewhat dark skin. So this, of course, you can see that cosmetic companies are doing this kind of multiculturalism already, right? So Iman Cosmetics, says it's for women of color. And then each one gets a name like sand, clay, earth, so you can wear these fancy new identities, right? I don't know, I could be sand, I just don't know. I haven't gone to Iman, right, and checked it out very closely. So these finely graded taxonomies of skin color are being sort of perpetuated, and this is a positive way of coding, right, darkness. Let me talk a little bit now about our favorite person, Aishwarya Rai. And I'm kidding, not all our favorite person. She's given me lots to write about. I owe her, right? So Aishwarya Rai was on Oprah, right? And later on CBS. And so she's been sort of doing the international circuit, the crossover, right? The crossover Indian star and so on. So when she was on Oprah magazine, she was coming into the Oprah stage after having been a model for L'Oreal, right? White Perfect. And you can see this hyper-scientific, hyper-medicalized lexicon, images of the dermis and the epidermis, right? To show you how effective it is and so on. So she was this mascot of, advanced scientific skin whitening. So she comes onto the stage, and here she's not only a beautiful Indian woman, but you know what happens? She's become a representative of all Indian women. That's what happens, right? She's a one woman who gets onto the Oprah stage, and Oprah, as we know, is no longer the shallow, talk show host. Oprah is doing good things. So then Oprah has to interrogate her about problems in India, right? So Oprah says to her, in your country, hundreds and hundreds of skin lightening products are being sold. What do you have to say about that, right? And so then she says, it's absolutely uncalled for and unwarranted. Never mind, I was L'Oreal's mascot, right? It's absolutely, in India, we have all skin colors, small eyes, fair skin, darker skin. Again, sort of these discourses of epidermal diversity, right? Multiculturalism, and so on. This sort of stuff that I watched on TV with reference to religion, right? Mile sur mera tumhara. You all remember that? This, all of India comes together, and so on. So this is the discourse she kind of perpetuates here. Now, one of the arguments that scholars like Angela Harris, right, have argued is that when Aishwarya Rai and Saira Mohan, right, act as these, women who are global, for global beauty, in fact, what's happened is whiteness is just being reincarnated in sort of an alibi form, right? So you have this cafe con crema skin, she calls, which has become the signifier of post-racial beauty. So even though Rai is coming over here as an Indian woman, she's also standing in for this new ideal, and that's Saira Mohan. And I don't want to get my facts wrong, but she's a biracial, right? Biracial Indian woman, kind of like Padma Lakshmi, yes, who's on Top Chef. And she's become the signifier of this kind of beauty. And Rai, right, would be part of this new standard of beauty that is not quite white, but still reaffirms whiteness. That's the argument, right? Not quite, and that's why the word alibi here. Now, another interesting thing about Aishwarya Rai is that in a sort of repudiation of her earlier endorsement of skin lightening cosmetics, in 2008, she came out and said, I will no longer endorse fairness creams, right? Unlike my fellow actors, Shah Rukh Khan and John Abraham, I'm not going to participate in this, crude sort of South Asian practice. And what's interesting to look at in terms of Rai's biography is that as she climbs onto the global stage, right, she wants to be the next Angelina Jolie, right? She doesn't want to be associated with someone who cannot be understood on a global stage. And so being on a global stage, being understood by people like Oprah, Bob Simon means now that you also have to have some of these, I'm going to save the world impulse, right? So you're beginning to see this sort of missionary, taking on these missionary discourses. So this was, part of that. It was covered to some degree in US media as well. Now, going further, right, she got another opportunity to present herself as, I'm progressive, right? I don't participate in this sort of disgusting South Asian epidermal politics, was when Elle magazine lightened her, right? And in fact, this is the rumor that she did not really observe herself being, whitened. It was her fans who noticed and pointed it out to her. And then she began to sort of say, I'm going to sue Elle and so on. So this was another moment for a celebrity to say, I'm Indian. I don't need to be white, right? I need to be appreciated as I am. Let me come to one sort of last media sort of example I want to discuss here. And this was a show called We the People that Barkha Dutt, hosts, and it comes out on Sunday evenings. She devoted one entire episode, right, to skin color discrimination, and she began quite differently from Vogue and Femina and said, are we a country of closet races, right, in her very exuberant, confrontational way. It's one of the few spaces in mainstream media where you actually saw representatives of the beauty and advertising industry sitting in the space being interrogated by Barkha Dutt. So there was something to that, right? It was really interesting to see that. And Alec Padamsee was not physically in the space, but he was Skyped in on a big screen. So he was there, right? And there's one point that was where Barkha goes up to the screen and goes, Alec, I respected you so much. How can you endorse these horrible things? It was very straightforward. What's going on? How can you do this, right? And then he starts articulating this postmodern argument, right? And saying, Barkha, did you want to look beautiful today? Did you decide what to wear? And so on. And then saying, skin lightening is no different than anyone getting up in the morning and saying, I will put on this necklace or I will put on these earrings. And so, bodily alteration falls on a spectrum. And who are we to condemn just skin lightening, right? It was very clever. And so he articulates this. She kind of accepts that on some level. And then here is where sort of the critical edge gets lost, right? They decide that instead of calling it skin lightening and being so obvious and blatant, it's better to call it brightening. That's where the show ends, right? So it starts off fairly radical and, a lot of introspection, but then ends on this, okay, if the advertising industry can say brightening instead of lightening, maybe we will all not walk around, at least the dark-skinned people, right? Wouldn't feel like crap every day, okay? Just say brightening. So this was kind of the argument, yes, she makes. Let me get to my third section. And this is where, I'm talking about these voices of outsiders, right? So you have voices of visitors to India, African-American visitors to India, and the South Asian diaspora, right, from different locations, critiquing colorism. And interestingly here, they make these explicit links between colorism and racism that so far, has been raised but not dealt with in any kind of thorough way, right? So beginning to look at these two isms and the intersections between them. There's also what you can see here, a borrowing of rhetorical, moral, activist and aesthetic inspiration from civil rights and anti-racist movements, right? Trying to take strategies to combat colorism, but borrowing from earlier anti-racist movements. And what I found intriguing theoretically is it shows the sort of ideological and territorial elasticity of these critiques in the sense that the South Asian diaspora in particular link up colorism in the Indian community with colorism in lots of other non-white communities, right? They don't see it as an isolated phenomenon. They explicitly reference, this group of called women of color, right? And say that this is something that we can collectively look at. So if you all remember, there were these racist attacks against Indian students in Australia, right? And Outlook magazine, one of India's, large circulation news magazines, covered the story. And they actually went down to Australia, reporters, and did this investigation. And so, in a sense, this was an example of Outlook looking outward at racism towards Indians in the Australian context. What is more interesting is that before they did this story, Outlook actually looked inward. Sorry for the bad quality. And what they did was to actually look at colorism and racism within India, right? And sort of, not blaming Australians for being racist towards Indians, but actually looking and seeing how within India we have forms of racism that are linked to colorism. And you can see the four faces there. They actually create this, fairness meter and show you the four different, the spectrum of skin color. Now, the story in there that is the most incendiary and straightforward, right, about the links between colorism and racism, is a column written by Dipiriye Kuku, a black activist, academic, and writer who spent some time in Delhi. And so he writes about the links between racism and colorism first by providing, giving you an in-depth look at the details of his own experiences in India, terrible experiences, right, of being stared at, of being denied housing, of being mistaken for, manual labor, etc., etc. And he has a white partner, right, white partner. So as he and his white partner navigate different spaces in India, he documents how he gets treated vis-a-vis his white partner, and then he says, but this is not just about me, right? There's racism in India far before I arrived. And then he starts talking about explicitly about colorism. There's also a 10-minute, and this is the screenshot from the documentary, right? A 10-minute documentary where he again gives his opinions in a more informal way, right, than the column. Now, in that, he explicitly references John Abraham, right, and points out that what John Abraham is holding is a fairness meter that, that documents how lighter you're becoming. And he makes this connections between, scientific projects of racism, discourses of eugenics, and so on, and what sort of advertising discourses are doing. Now, here are some examples of videos from the diaspora. So this one was called Not Fair, Still Lovely by Geeta Malik. And this has young Indian Americans, right, expressing opposition to colorism. And in a very different way than mainstream media discourses, these are very, very explicit about how angry they are about it. And this is what I mean about borrowing inspiration, right, in that the way they talk, their gestures, right, and how they talk about this needs to be eliminated, very much calls on these discourses of anti-racism. So this is a young woman, Priya Shah, doing her PhD. She might be a professor now. This was about, 5 years ago, joined by others, and talking about how shocked she was at how deeply embedded this is, even among her Indian American friends, right? Not just in India, but also among her Indian American peers and friends. So this is a 6-minute video, and it has this style of reality TV, right? They all face the camera, they all look at you, and they're asking you to get involved. It's not just about this is happening, right? It's about you can do something about it. So the address is very direct, confrontational, and blunt, right? And straightforward. And this is a documentary called Shadeism. And this is about 25 minutes long, right? Much more elaborate than the previous one by a woman called Nayani Tyagaraja, a Canadian Tamil Sri Lankan filmmaker. And this video, I picked a screenshot of her talking to her niece, right? About what skin color means and kind of trying to get at it from a child's perspective. And then she's joined by other young women of color from different parts, diaspora from different parts of the world, right? Including Saudi Arabia, a couple of people from Africa, and talking to them about what is it like in your communities? How is it similar? How is it different? So this one is much more of a transnational women, from the perspective of a woman of color rather than just Asian. This one's very well made. I mean, good enough to show in a class actually and have discussion. Now, here is another one by Anita Rani, a British Indian television and radio personality. This one is so different from the previous one by Nayani. Nayani's is more of an affirmative personal journey where you link up, right, with other women and you have this collective narrative, right? This one is just straightforward, hard-nosed investigative journalism, right? She goes undercover into beauty salons. She goes into grocery stores. She actually goes into a women's magazine for South Asian British women and really starts scolding them and saying, look at this. How can you do this? How can you perpetuate this, right? So much more confrontational, a sort of social justice kind of model, right, that is guiding her viewpoint. She also has a last scene where she makes herself darker and then goes home and then, kind of documents her mother's reaction to her. Very personal reaction to her, saying, what have you done to yourself, right? And then she challenges her mother and says, you're disgusting. Look at your reaction. How can you do this, and so on. So, so this was a much more, you saw more anger, right, on this one. Now, let me come to sort of my last section here and then my conclusion. So this section, I'm looking at sort of more confessional, therapeutic, right? And sort of skin stories that are trying to turn dark skin into, an affirmative sort of embodiment, right? And so these are more, so some of the examples I have, middle-class women's public campaigns to teach audiences about skin color bias. And most of them are kind of self-esteem building projects, right, with therapeutic goals. So you will have mothers, right, talking about what happens to their daughters, how they want to protect their daughters from skin color oppression, how they want a more equal world for dark-skinned girls as well as light-skinned girls. You also have digital campaigns, and one of the digital campaigns I'll share with you, they're challenging what I'm calling, right, the gay Tuckman's concept, symbolic annihilation of dark-skinned South Asian people, which is the argument that as long as we don't have enough images of dark-skinned South Asian people in positive spaces, this marginalization will continue, right? So this project of visual recognition, gaining visual recognition for dark-skinned people. And then finally, a range of artistic products and performances that capture the pain of colorism and put colorism and put dark skin, right, try to put dark skin within a more positive, right, context. So this was the campaign that I showed you earlier, the woman called Lydia Duraraj, right? This was the campaign, Dark is Beautiful, and they had a whole big campaign, right, where they hosted a 2-day event where they asked children and mothers and families to come in and to do art and to write poetry and to create murals, right, about what being dark-skinned means and what they can do, right, to change the situation and so on. And this was one of the posters that they had. And here are examples of the kind of coverage, right, that they received. And you can see here a toast to the dark skin. If you go to the Women of Worth campaign's website, there's lots of interesting personal narratives, right, of one woman who already had a child, a daughter, and then decided to adopt a second daughter, and then struggled because she wanted her second daughter to have the same skin tone as her first daughter, because she didn't want them to, you know how it is, sisters get differentiated, right? She did not want her adopted child to suffer that stigma. And so she talks about what it took for her to find her daughter, and then, of course, in the end, she ended up getting only a dark-skinned daughter. And she talks about coping with that, trying to teach her, and she suffered discrimination in the schools, going and talking to the teachers. So a very sort of personal life narrative of, maternal victory, right? What does it mean to deal with this problem and overcome overcome it. There's other women who have posted. There's one woman who posted a poem. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to read the poem to you. This is a poem called Good Mothers by Sauda Qasim. And she sort of eulogizes mothers for raising proud, dark-skinned daughters. My mother, unlike good mothers, did not cover me in cuticura. She didn't want me paraded in white face, the Keralite kabuki artist. She kissed my bronze toes and admired my unfair skin. My mother sneers at whitening unguents and loves my dark brow, right? So this is kind of the tone of what you see here, the cultural productions that are posted on this campaign. Now, this is a website by an Indian American woman. She did this for her master's project, right? It's called Colors of Brown. And she actually came to, she has a blog now for Kindle magazine in Kolkata. It's an explicitly sort of anti-colorism blog, right? She came to Bloomington to interview me for, about my research. And so I got to know her a bit. And this is her website. And on her website, she's posted an interview, right, with Nandita Das. So this is the video, right, she has with Nandita Das. And in this, Nandita Das shares her story of, how she couldn't get different roles, of how she overcame this, how her parents, helped her, overcome these struggles and become the person she is, right? So what you're seeing here is very much of a, particular kind of second wave feminist, psychologized models, right? Individualized, psychologized models of empowerment, where, you have role models who can go into public spaces and help people become better. This is not a critique of structural forms of colorism or racism, right? It's very much of this therapeutic kinds of empowerment. Now, this is an example of these, what I call digital projects, right, by young Indian Americans. This is a woman from, actually, a blogger from Portland, Oregon, right? And her blog is called Dark, Lovely, and South Asian. It's actually she has a poignant sort of essay about what started her, on this journey. And she says, under a lovely moon in August in Chennai, that's how she starts and says, that's where I created this blog. And here's what she talks about. She says, growing up in Portland, Oregon, I knew I was dark-skinned. I knew I had a racial identity. I knew I was not in the center, and so on. But she says, I had no idea. And then I went to India, and I thought here I would find my community, right? And she said, things got worse and worse. Portland started looking good. Right? I wanted to get back to Portland, okay? So she talks about wherever she went, experiencing this very, feelings of rejection. And she talks about sobbing and just, feeling completely disillusioned, right? So there's this narrative, right, of going home and feeling this. Lydia Duraraj, who I introduced you to with the introduction, also says that. She says, I came to the US and it was so nice to just be Indian. I was not dark-skinned. People just called me Indian, and they saw a light-skinned Indian as Indian and me as Indian. And so in a way, for me to come to the US was a way to escape that dark-skinned identity, right? And so in a way, Jasmine Tana is narrating that same issue, but by going to India the other way, right? Experiencing that. And what she does on her blog is, she has an open invitation to people and says, please post your own stories here. But more than that, if you have pictures of dark-skinned people you admire, right, that you think others ought to admire and worship, please post them here. So when you click on that link, forewarning, hundreds of images, right, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images. It's just like this tsunami, right, coming at you. And I just wanted to give you an example, right, of some of the people she has. That's a model, Lakshmi Menon, over there, right, Indian model. And this is, of course, our own Mindy Kaling. And this is another model, actress, Amara Khan. And so she has examples of these kinds of people. But it's not just celebrities. So when you go to this, tsunami image site, you will see people posting images of their dark-skinned aunt, their dark-skinned grandmothers, right? Relatives, and so on. And so this is, again, what I mentioned in the introduction to this section, combating this idea of symbolic annihilation, and then, sort of rehabilitating this dark-skinned body by saying, if you just put enough positive images out there, it's got to counter, some of these other discourses, including advertising discourses. So visual images, right, become a sort of strategy, and I would say a regimen for this disease, right? That if you saw enough of these, like popping pills in a way, it could maybe, right, address the problem. Now, this is a whole, set of this is an archive that I have not really looked at in depth, right? I'm sort of beginning to collate these more affirmative discourses. This is a Malaysian, Tamil, British performance artist called Rani Murthy. So Rani Murthy stages these plays, and she has one very explicitly, right, about skin color. And she, talks through this play, she talks about her own, in Malaysia, growing up Tamil, all these discourses she heard, right, from her family, from her relatives. And one of the stories she narrates is about her, how somebody says to her, how did you become successful? It's a BBC interview. And she says, well, my grandmother said to me, nobody's going to marry you, so you got to make your own money. You have no way out, right? This is what my grandmother said to me. I am large, I am dark-skinned, and I am not coy. So you have to make money. And she says, this fueled me. Eventually, I'm critiquing it. But still, this is what kind of fueled my success. And the play she does on skin color is fascinating. So she plays one of these brides who's rejected an arranged marriage and becomes, expresses outrage, but she also acts as like a doctor who has this disease called vitiligo, where your skin becomes white. And then her dilemma is how to paint that brown. So rather than whitening, it's how to maintain integrity of her brownness, right? And Michael Jackson has claimed that he had the same disease, right? Vitiligo, that he's not, mentally diseased or anything, that's what he had to do. He became white rather than being patchy, yes? That's what he told Oprah. And so she stages these, and then she also has one scene where she's a South African albino talking to Nelson Mandela, and saying, about this body she inhabits, and what does it mean to be South African black but albino, okay? And so she puts the skin lightening phenomenon and dark skin within this very interesting transnational spectrum, right, of this struggles with outer embodiment, not fitting with what you think about yourself, your inner embodiment, the struggle. Now, on Baji on the beach, Gurinder Chadha has one scene where there's a young daughter-in-law whose marriage is breaking up. And this is on the beach, right? They're having that picnic. And the mother-in-law says to the young daughter-in-law, you are responsible for this because you are dark-skinned. So you have this moment, right, where this problem is highlighted and dealt with. This is a novel by a woman, Amulya Malladi, called The Mango Season. I don't know if anyone's read it. Right? It's an interesting novel to read on a plane within an hour and a half, right? Very interesting novel. This novel has a young Telugu, student living in America, going back home. Of course, I loved it because she goes back to Hyderabad, right? I've read it like 4 times, okay? So my hometown. So she goes back to Hyderabad, and she has to announce to her conservative family that she has an American boyfriend, right? But after getting there, she finds out that one of her young aunts has to get married and is dark-skinned, right? And so she's trying to help her young aunt cope with this oppression, right? And telling her, you don't need to accept anyone just because you're dark-skinned, because the family starts parading grooms before her, right? A lot of them, sorry, very yucky people. Right? And just saying, you're not going to get anybody, just marry this one, just marry that one. And so she starts becoming a source of support. But then the big moment towards the end that she, sort of tells you is that, now that I've helped my aunt, what am I going to do about myself? Because my American boyfriend is African American. How am I going to break this news to my family, right? And so Amulya, in her entertaining way, not very serious, weaves, again, this colorism and racism together, right? And so how do you tell your family, to cross this race divide and then the color divide? How do you navigate, right, those different things? And then this one is actually, it's illegal of me to put this on here, but I did anyway, right? I haven't thought through this at all. Okay, I was kind of trying to look at artistic representations. Okay, and so if you look at Amrita Shergill's artistic representations, it's one of the few sort of works of a corpus where you actually see dark-skinned people, and represented boldly and in a very straightforward way, right? Now, there's a cultural politics here that I have not gone into yet because she is biracial and, she was in some ways looking for the authentic pastoral, where can I find real India? So there is, an underbelly to this. But nevertheless, I'm kind of looking at this and trying to understand, right? What are the implications and the meanings of this kind of artistic work? And I should credit my friend Judith Brown in English, who's working on Amrita Shergill. And it came out at lunch. Right, we were eating falafels or something, and I told her, and she said, "Oh, have you seen? These you might consider this, right?" And so I'm still sort of looking at this realm. Let me kind of talk a little bit and conclude here if I can, right? So what are some possibilities of these, exfoliating or abrasive sorts of discourses? In a way, they do offer robust critiques of commodity colorism, right? At a time when you have skin lightening appearing for every part of the body, right, including most recently the vagina. Right, you have skin lightening products now for the vagina, which is very controversial. In that sort of, in a vacuum, they offer something, right? These are the spoofs and the YouTube critiques and so on. Some of this discourse does expose and complicate links between racism and colorism, right? Something that, is long overdue, I think. You also see these as not just being confined within India, but transnational articulation, right? You see the diaspora involved. You saw, African-American critics and activists sort of jumping into this space. And then what you're seeing here is this concept that I'm still trying to work through, the idea of recognition, right? Seeking recognition and legitimacy for colorism as a form of oppression. And when I think about, I was just talking to somebody right before the talk, if you think about models of multiculturalism in India, largely they've been articulated along the lines of about religion, right, and region. So religion and region, Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, let's all get along. And then if you look at, visual and official discourses, a lot of it is about different ethnicities, different languages. We've never had, at least I never went to school and heard, let's all get along, dark-skinned and light-skinned people, right? This was not something that was explicitly. So so the reason I'm bringing this up is that within the United States, right, you had the idea of black is beautiful generated through a very sort of politicized framework of civil rights, and anti-racist discourse. That's not what's happening here, right? It's a very, very different context. And of course, they're trying to generate claims for inclusion. What are some of the limits, right? And the limits I see are, if you look at the comedic critiques and the spoofs, most of them are targeting Fair and Lovely, which targets lower-end consumers, right? What you're not seeing a critique of is very high-end skin lightening cosmetics, which are all mostly sold online, right? And they don't have these discourses of transformation, first phase dark, last phase light, which are very easy to critique. So in a way, the critiques are useful, but they're, only targeting products that are sold to particular classes, right? Leaving untouched the more sort of sanitized discourses in the internet space. Then, as I already pointed out, these are very therapeutic, middle class, individualized kinds of discourses, targeting the idea of beauty rather than issues of poverty, class, caste, etc. Right? They're not articulated along those kinds of lines, and so you don't have these more systematic kinds of critiques. But nevertheless, they have some possibility. And let me conclude by talking a little bit about Sri Rajiv Dixit, a conservative Indian activist and a public intellectual who has passed away, right? And I found this, so this is me just scouring the internet, looking for comedies and spoofs, etc., parodies, and I chance upon this. So I'm beginning to watch it, and it shows him in a closed room, and here are all the men. It's all men only, right? Very much like an RSS type of setting, right? He's in the room, he's on a stage, you have all these young men sitting down, and he's lecturing to them. Now, when you look at, discourses of opposition to skin lightening, the only piece of work I found was by Lynn Thomas, who's working on South Africa, right? And what Lynn Thomas argues is that skin lightening cosmetics in South Africa, particularly in East Africa, were cast out and banned for a while because African intellectuals, political leaders saw them as an affront to the creation of African nationalism and black pride, right? So that was one source of opposition, male intellectuals and, politicians saying, how can we build our own identity after colonialism if we're whitening ourselves? We cannot have these products. A second source of opposition in South Africa was medical professionals and, sort of women joining these medical professionals, talking about high levels of hydroquinone and mercury. So those were sort of the two sources of opposition in South Africa. This person falls into this category of being, a leader and an intellectual. So he starts off by saying, you Indians, you Indian people, you are so stupid to use these products. We don't want to be white, do we? There's a sort of anti-imperial tone, right? Anti-imperialism, anti-Western, critical tone. And he says, you know what? I tried hundreds of tubes of Fair and Lovely on my buffalo, and nothing happened to it. You should not buy these products. So instead of wasting it on your buffalo, you should use it to educate your child, right? So this very sort of, so interesting. But as you go, more into the video and listen, he starts telling his audience, we are the most superior race. We have the perfect skin. And this is the analogy he uses, right? And he also says, if skin lightening creams were really effective, we would have no dark-skinned Africans in Africa. This is what he says, right? And then he ends by saying, if I could tell you why you're the superior race, here are my metaphors. Burned roti would be people who live in Africa. Uncooked roti would be white people. And here we are, beautifully, perfectly cooked roti, right? So this is kind of, the discourse. And given that, I would say that everything I've kind of discussed so far has some potential, right, against the context, right, of discourses like this. And so that's why I'm kind of ending with this, right, to say it does have some possibility, but what kinds of possibilities? And then what are the limits? Is this, should all dark-skinned Indian people start marching on the streets? I don't know. Maybe not. Should these claims for recognition have any legitimacy? What does all this mean? How do you insert feminism? Certainly, the feminist movement in India has not gotten involved with this at all. And you can see to some degree why. Because it's probably constructed as a middle-class bourgeois, right, women's issue. Nevertheless, it's something to raise and ask. Why is it that there's not any official feminist voice? And one of the directions I want to go further, right, is there's a book by Maxine Lades Craig. This is not her book cover, right? Ain't I a Beauty Queen? It's a historical examination of the politics of skin color in the black community here. She also does oral history interviews with black women, right, on skin color issues. A very, very interesting, provocative book. And she establishes kind of the context within which black is beautiful, right, comes out of, and what it meant, including talking about what does it mean when if black is beautiful, what are the struggles for very light-skinned African Americans, right? Issues that are not so germane to South Asia. But nevertheless, if you look at, some of the media examples I've discussed, they borrow very much, right, from this sort of Black is Beautiful movement, from the ways in which they articulate skin color discrimination as oppressive, as something that we need to get rid of. If you look at Jasmine Tana, she cites a lot of Black feminist work at the beginning of her essay, right? Including Audre Lorde, and then the whole Darkest Beautiful campaign. So you're seeing a lot of borrowing, and I'd like to develop something a bit more of a deeply comparative, right, perspective, just to sharpen my analysis. So that's it. That's the end of my talk. Thank you. Yes, yeah, of course.
Floor is open for questions. Sam, could you take the microphone? Thanks. Just for
extracts that you showed from the various magazines, and some of them are obviously in English, but were some of them translations from the vernacular media as well? So I'm curious as to what role, if any, the vernacular media and plays on.
Good question. I'll tell you. I haven't. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Or should I stay behind the mic here?
Rather for the recording, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I will be frozen. No problem. You ask a very good question. One of the ads I showed, for the face wash before and after, that was from a Tamil magazine, Ananda Vikatan, a small Tamil, it's a small magazine. I have not explored vernacular media enough. It would be great to do that. So I should do that more. Largely, I've focused on, English language media so far. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Is it working? Sorry. Okay. So my question is related to deities, religion, and how does that affect the consumption? Do you think the representation of deities, like if you see Sita in the Ramayana, she's completely fair, white. Does that have an effect on the people, the religious aspect?
Yeah. I actually don't have the answer to your question because I don't know. But you're asking a relevant question, which is how do, if you look at calendar art, right? If you look at even, I don't know if Amar Chitra Katha has gone through a radical revision, but these comics that we read, do you know what these are? Yeah, Amar Chitra Katha comics. A lot of them do code, right, dark-skinned people as sort of the demons, and the light-skinned people, right, so you will see, Sita represented as very light-skinned. But sociologically speaking, what is the effect? I mean, it's something to ponder and ask. What is the effect? I would say it's probably contributing to hegemonic beauty ideals, right? It's one more strand along with, and that's why Jasmine Tana, who says there's not enough dark-skinned people, is probably coming from this sort of critique, right? That wherever you see mostly, light skin represented in these positive ways. Yeah.
I could make a comment here.
Yes.
Rama and Krishna are dark skinned.
Yes. Yes.
And they are revered. Okay. Kali is mentioned.
Dark skin.
Dark skin. So I don't see any context in the talking of deities and the skin color bias, if you want to call it that way.
Okay. This side.
So I have two comments, and they're both about the type of consumptive and materialism that you. So one idea that I was wondering is, have you looked at other forms of promoting this type of colorism? Like for instance, I remember when I was 4 or 5, one of my birthday gifts or some gift was a Miss India Barbie doll. So Miss India had dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, and I remember my brother and I coloring her face in, or her hair, and we basically tore the doll apart. But have you looked at other sorts of those types of sources? Because it's not just an adolescent thing, it's not just a grown-up woman thing, but a lot of these ideas of colorism are circulated and promoted even from younger stages of life, and in many ways young girls and even guys can be even socialized in these types of normative practices through other material practices and consumer goods. So have you looked at any of those?
No, let me ask you again. Were these sort of light-skinned Barbie dolls?
They were much lighter than anyone in my family.
Ah, okay. And then you said with blonde hair and...
Definitely blue eyes, not like blonde, like general typical blonde Barbie doll, but it was definitely not black.
Well, I haven't looked so much at that, partly because I've moved on from looking at practices, material practices that promote colorism, really to looking at those that protest it, right? Okay. My whole previous projects, right, were looking at those mainstream, practices. But the interesting point you're bringing up is that when you go to Women of Worth's Facebook page, they target that, right? They say we need to be careful about how dolls socialize our children. But this was an issue. If you again look at Maxine Leeds Craig's book, right? She talks, one of the contexts in which Black is Beautiful emerged out of was African American medical professionals, including psychologists and psychotherapists, beginning to actually do research on how, white dolls, damage little African American girls, self-esteem. Right? And they're beginning to publicize their work, beginning to talk in their churches, in community venues, right? And this becomes the context for giving legitimacy to Black is Beautiful, right? And that's why when I saw how Women of Worth was sort of borrowing from what had happened in the US, right? Talking about dolls and so on, that's where I've become interested in the comparison. So they have looked at that, okay? Yeah.
And then the second question I had was, because these facial creams to a certain degree are promoting a certain idea of whiteness and beauty. But then I was wondering if in the research that you've been doing, if you've noticed people arguing like devil's advocate as these creams are almost as good as any sort of cosmetic makeup to create beauty, that they're not really promoting any form of colorism, but they are in essence just another aspect of a makeup process of what a woman needs to do in general to wake up and leave the house and look presentable. So have you seen much of that?
And that's what you saw on Barkha Dutt's We the People, right? Very clever representatives of the beauty industry, fairly sophisticated and articulate, who say, why are you denying, right? So if you have, large numbers of Indian women are now going from small towns to the big cities, right? To work in service industries, to work in the beauty industry. So if you go to big Indian malls now, you have young Indian women at lots of stores now. And a lot of them, so industries in which the body and your looks are more important are spreading all over India, right? And so one of the arguments that these beauty representatives brought up was, why would you deny someone like that upward economic mobility? If they want to use the cream, and if it gives them confidence, right? And that's what Alec Padamsee says to Barkha. Didn't you try to look beautiful today? This journalist, and says, didn't you decide, that I'm going to wear this kurta, that kind of hair? So why is skin alteration any different than altering anything else or any other attempt to look beautiful, right? And there's something to be, you have to question. There's a self-interest there, right? They are designing the commercials and they are producing the products, but there's certainly a cautionary note there about not pathologizing women's desire to become beautiful, to become light-skinned, right? And this is something I've discussed in my previous research where I interviewed childcare workers in Delhi, yes? And this is the interesting sort of finding. I said, do you believe these will lighten your skin? A good number of them said, hell no. Who believes that? They don't lighten skin, right? I said, why do you buy it then? It might. It just might, right? And so there was very much of this gambling metaphor, okay? And there was also this idea that I am now in the city and I'm doing this work and I have some surplus money. One of the luxuries I want is to buy useless products. products that don't have a utilitarian value, right? This marks my upward mobility. And so, just sort of imagining that all consumers who buy these products, yes, are, just duped masses in the Adorno model, right, may not hold up. So there is some credibility there to thinking that, you have to, it's not about, consumers buying wholesale. That's not the only reason to critique it. It's more about, saturating the public sphere with certain hegemonic ideals, right? And it might affect some people, doesn't affect everyone the same way. Yes.
Have you seen critiques and examples of protest that is integrated with more complex or nuanced caste and class critique and critiquing neoliberalism? What are the examples of colorism that you've seen either coming out of radical movements and or integrated with deeper, more nuanced?
I have not. No. And I mean, there's obviously academic critiques that do that. There's a woman, Amina Mire, a scholar in Canada, who does this amazing job. There's other feminist critics who do that. But certainly from these more popular critiques, you're not seeing, that sort of structural analysis, yeah.
So I have a twofold question. First, you talk we talk about the medicalization of the language and the cross sections of the skin, and you alluded to doctors in South Africa perhaps protesting this, and I was just curious if that was a phenomenon at all, or maybe not. Secondly, is there like an Hindustan Unilever PR response?
Is there, an industry response?
Yeah, an industry response, or like spin. I mean, obviously the commercials are the response, but do you see
Besides
this
the
approach,
commercials.
the commercials kind of changing in response to the critique
Yeah.
at all?
Yeah. Well, the question about medical professionals. So this was actually in the 50s and 60s in South Africa, right? So it's historical analysis. In India, there's not that much protest because most of these products they don't have the dangerous levels of hydroquinone and mercury, right? And so my theory is that they're set up to not work. The industrial size bleach that was in the YouTube is probably what works, but then you might be dead. Okay, so so in a sense, I mean, these products, are largely, I think, kind of a placebo effect, right? And they may be sunscreens, and I don't have, I haven't done much research on whether they're effective or not, but they are not above the legal limits for hydroquinone and mercury. And so, therefore, you don't quite have that level of medical professionals protesting. Now, you do have, medical professionals talking about, not a large discourse, one small stream, talking about using bleach over and over again. So you do have some of that in women's magazines, because if you continue to use bleach over and over again, it makes your skin dark. It does the opposite, right? It starts really, because what bleach does is it bleaches the hair on your skin, right? It turns it golden so you can look like a deity. But I mean, the deity effect only lasts for a while, and then it begins scarring and pigmentation. So there's a little bit of a discourse about that. And as a response to that, bleach companies in India now have milder forms of bleaches. They'll say mild bleach, instead of, industrial strength. So that is kind of one response. Now, for the industry response, the only one I found, and that's why I found the Barkha Dutt show interesting, that's the only one. Apart from that, any kind of defense, systematic defense, available in, as something that can be analyzed through documents, I couldn't find anything, right? And so in my monograph, Hindustan Liver, this is a response. Hindustan Liver did not give me permission to publish any of my ads, right? And then I told the journal, you should publish it. It's academic, and the journal copped out. So I couldn't publish. So there's a response for you, right? A defensive response, yes.
I'm wondering if this sort of a historical
being very seductive to having in with these ideas of African natural beauty. And so the shampoo products and face products that are typical for African people won't. And so I wonder if there's some sort of parallel going on in the Indian case where there's a historical, maybe colonial or not, elements that perhaps makes all of this fit into more sensible sort of picture or discourse.
Yeah, or some kind of explanation. Is that what you're asking? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, so here's the. So, as far as historical explanations go, I found, including me, right, there's no one explanation, right, because you have, colonialism, and then you have, sort of myths and perceptions of Aryan invasions, right, and then you have caste, right. There's some historians here who would probably be far better, I don't go, it's kind of a hot potato. I just kind of say there's no one explanation, linear causal explanation. So there's all these a potpourri of phenomena going on. And then, of course, there was this whole question of varna or caste as skin color, right? And I found I found very mixed opinions about this, right? One group saying, yes, it is skin color. Another group saying it is not skin color. It's just a way of coding. It does not refer to bodily skin color. So much disputed origins. And now, if you look at these products and, the way they have flourished, it's not as though they have created colorism, right? This has been in India a long time. And when I was a young woman, you had, a long time ago, you had a product called Vico Vajradanti. Remember? Vico Vajradanti? With a,
Commercial ad.
what a commercial.
I won't try and sing it. I do.
Badi nazuk se pali, right? Hamari banu. We all sing it, right? It is most beautiful commercial. But it was broadcast again and again, and it was a very Indian sort of product, right? Its main unique selling proposition was it has tons of turmeric in it, which is seen as a indigenous herbal, skin beauty product. So you had that, and then you had, family discourse about skin color, and so on. But I wouldn't say that dark skin was always and only seen as bad, right? It's a very fluid concept, okay? And so within my own family, for example, I would hear sort of my grandmother saying, pointing to somebody very light-skinned and saying, that person is light-skinned, but she is like a block of concrete. Right? What she meant was there's no grace, no charm, no animation, no liveliness, right? She would say that, Maybe it was to make us feel not so bad. She was very light-skinned, we were dark-skinned, okay? But nevertheless, I saw this sort of counter-discourse every now and then. But what has happened, since globalization is, of course, this creation of the market, right? And then tied to the neoliberal imperative of, everyone can be upwardly mobile. And one way to be upwardly mobile is to become light-skinned. And then when it gets tied to the job market, right, that if you are light-skinned, if you are even a tad bit lighter-skinned at the job interview, and there's two other competitors, maybe you can have the edge, right? So it's being particularly for women who are coming into the city now and looking for these service types of jobs. And so definitely, it's tied to this kind of, the flourishing of the market is not just about skin color, but tied to these other, kinds of ideas. Did I answer your question at all? Yes, I tried.
Actually, I think I'm afraid I'm going to say this is the last question because we're bumping up against time a little bit.
Okay, first of all, I just wanted to follow up on the comment about deities. I don't think we should close that question, because you've done work on Amrchitra Kitha.
Yes, I have.
And so I think that's an open question. We should still keep
continue.
Coming back to
Yes,
that.
yes.
That's not the final word on it. But my question, it's not really a question, it's part question, part observation. And it has to do with this very important linkage of, the caste politics. And you said you've looked at it a little bit. But it relates to two things. One, I'm going to move a little bit and ask about something different, and that is how this is seen, by different communities and how deep it goes, the critique. I think the language that's being used will have a lot to say about that. So if you look at
The point he brought up about vernacular.
yes, so
Yes.
when you look at that, you'll be able to see, and also with the caste politics, you'll be able to see, how many layers does it cross, and how is it perceived in terms of being either very bourgeois, or will it take root? Is it indigenous enough? Does it sprout from the Indian context, or is it mimicry of
Yes.
Western language of racism and colorism? And I think that'll be a very important aspect in terms of looking at how it finds its way and what kind of ripple effects it can have. Because with Indian feminisms, you have you have this very important question that's been there for a long time, and whether it attaches to this kind of, you can't really call it a movement, but these kinds of critiques
Yes.
would be, I think, an important question to look at. Because with Indian feminisms, it's the same question. Where has it come from?
Yes. How is
does
it
have local roots?
Yes.
Is it organic? Is it not organic? Is
Yeah.
it inorganic? So those kinds of questions, I think, will be very interesting. to
I
look
think
at.
so. And one interesting, aspect I didn't bring out very much in the, diaspora videos, right, where they're beginning to question this sort of skin color discrimination. There was also some videos made by young Indian women. They're all women, right? And one of them was actually, exploring her family's endorsing of colorism, right? And this sort of local, that you're talking about. So she's Bengali. She lives in Calcutta, and she's produced this 20-minute video of going into her school, talking to her teacher about it, like giving the mic to her teacher. But so you know how it's always been sort of silent within families, right? And so when I have talked to people about colorism, usually it is, there's 3 sisters in a family. One is very light skinned. The other 2 are not seen as beautiful. They don't receive preferential treatment. Very painful, right? They experience pain as children and so on, right? But what these young women are doing, so this one woman actually goes into her grandparents' home. She thrusts the mic into, he looks about 80 years old, her grandpa's face, and says, "So, did you want a light-skinned bride? Tell me. Is that okay?" And then, he has to look at his wife, the grandmother. He's like, "Why are you asking me this at this time?" She says, "It's important. Answer me." And they're talking in Bengali, right, explaining. And then the grandmother says, "Yeah, he looked at a lot of brides before he picked me." And then she says, "He thought he was so special. He's not that special," right? And so it was fascinating to me how they're producing these family oral histories, that are fairly local, positioned within particular spaces, right? There's another one by a young woman in Bombay, who does the same thing. And so not only are they sort of making public, right, things that were coded as shameful and silent and one shouldn't talk about, but they're also doing some of this. But certainly as a scholar would be interesting for me, but I think the question for me would be, where would I go? How would I start? Which community would I target? And why, and what is the justification, right, for this site and so on. But to do something of a case study, I think, would be useful. Yeah.
Please join me in thanking.
Thank you.